5, breaking news from News Channel 3.
A monster wildfire burning out of control near Santa Paula.
I remember getting a text message from the Ventura County Sheriff's Department saying that there was a small fire. And I remember I called the assignment desk and they said, okay, we'll monitor it. And then 20 minutes later, they called us saying, okay, you're gonna go out. And we drove down there, and as we got closer, we could see that the sky was a little bit darker, so I was like, okay, it's bigger than I thought. And then we got to our location that we were assigned, and you could just see in everyone's face that there was no rule book for this one.
We got a call around 6:30 about a fire in Santa Paula. We raced to Santa Paula, and we went live pretty much on the half hour till midnight. And then the station decided to wait till the morning shows, and we knew not to do that. So we did Facebook Lives all night long. And we followed the fire from Santa Paula to Ventura on Foothill and those back roads where people were trying to save their houses with a garden hose, and there was no pressure. And they were watching their homes burn.
You know, typically we see our strongest or largest wildfires in the fall, sometimes late summer when things are really dry, but this was a little unusual to get something this big this time of year, because usually in December we're entering our rainy season. And again, the weather was very windy, and every time I look at the models every day, it was almost disheartening to see this ridge of high pressure which brought the wind and brought these dry conditions just sit parked right over the West Coast and not really changing for weeks at a time.
In the booth during that wall-to-wall coverage, I just remember, I had the headset on, I had the phone right here, I had the phone for people to call in, and I was just constantly switching back between those three. You got the director in front of you, so it's like I've shot one instruction to him, I got to tell it to the anchors, I got to tell it to the reporter, ask the assignment desk for something. You're just constantly going back and forth between talking to the person in front of you, talking to someone through your headset, or talking to someone on the phone. So many lines of communication, all of them equally important, because everyone had to be on the same page constantly in order to make things go as smoothly as possible on air.
There were going to be little gaps where all of a sudden you can tell that we're starting to say the same information over. That's where Claire on the assignment desk, or Oscar on the web, or social media, even our cooperation with public information officers, they would call in, or we'd call them and say, hey, look, we need somebody to come up and talk about this, and they'd be instantly available.
I call it fire fatigue, because you're here, and when conditions are blowing up, so to speak, or it's very active, adrenaline kicks in. So if you're working an 18 to 24-hour shift and you're on wall-to-wall coverage, you're okay for the most part. But it's when things die down a little bit and we had to do cut-ins every half hour, every hour throughout the overnight hours on some of the slower days, it was tiring, because you can really only say the same thing so many ways, and you're on at midnight, 12:30, 1 o'clock, and there's really no new information. But you have to realize people don't watch all the time, so you want to make sure that they understand the severity of the situation.
And new information is always important, and we had a fun thing that we were doing with Santa Barbara County Fire, their PIO, Dave Zanaboni. I would literally drop him a pin, and he would just say, where are you? I would drop him a pin on my iPhone, and he would meet us there. So every half hour, every hour, whatever it was, whenever we could meet up, we were trying to get the latest information directly from the source. So talking with them, having updates with them, live interviews with them whenever we could, as much as we could, especially when you're in continuous coverage, is a huge help, because it paints the bigger picture of what's happening to the entire community and not just the street that the reporter may be on.
The flames are moving down this hill very fast, and the wind's very strong as well. We're getting blown around, and there's dirt being flown up everywhere. Look at the spinning inside that cloud of smoke up there. It's getting very intense. We're on East Mountain Drive.
The potential for it to keep moving or to explode at any time was always there. So we had to have ourselves on notice 24/7 just to be prepared if it started to move into areas where there were structures, or also getting into areas where it would close Highway 101. Now all of a sudden Highway 101 is closed off and on. And in some cases it wasn't closed, but it was burning on both sides. That was absolutely frightening for drivers. When I was on the side of the road and saw that, I couldn't believe that cars were going through or stopping and then going. They were trying to keep the highway open. And for those of us preparing for the fire, that gave us an indication that at any given time, it could flare up in different pockets to either go after structures, go after oil facilities, which are in Ventura County, or close Highway 101, a major U.S. highway. That's a handful to keep an eye on.
But it was still really like terrifying knowing that your coworkers and your friends are out there like right there, and you're editing the footage and you're kind of just wondering like, are they going to be safe? And I remember like every phone call I had with like Joyce, we ended with, okay, be safe.
As a news person, you're always looking for, where's the shot? Where's the money shot? Where can I stand to get the shot that I want? I didn't want to be far away. I was tired of being far away. I wanted to get closer, and Tracy was like, okay, but be safe. And so we went to an area where I knew we were far enough away, and I knew if the fire ever got to us, I could get out. So I positioned the car. I remember I was shooting the fire, and I remember that these photographers, I think they were stringer photographers, they come running out of the mountains and they say, get in your car, it's moving. And I remember as I was picking up the camera and putting it in the car, the fire went from being super far away to now I could feel the heat.
Yeah, the fire is moving in a westerly direction on that flank. It's actually it's expanding on all flanks, but that particular area has been working its way west since it crossed Highway 33 sometime last night. And as it moves toward the county line, the concern is communities like Carpinteria and the surrounding areas.
That it was just such a reminder that this community is part of our newsroom. I mean, it was almost as if people were in the newsroom with us. We had the PIOs who were calling, we had the members of the public, the residents who were right there, people who were on the fringes of it. It was just such an incredible community and team effort. It was almost like this ball bearing mechanism, this assembly line of information, where we were on the desk and we had producers just running Post-it notes to us and texting us and emailing us.
On Saturday the 16th, same issue when the fires were approaching here in Santa Barbara. And that was probably the toughest day because not only was, the fire raging, it was here. The fire was here. So on top of, trying to, focus on your job here, you're also worrying about what's actually coming your way. It's like, it felt more intense that day because the threat was actually here. Like you're used to the early days of Thomas Fire, at least for me here in Santa Barbara, it started off in Ventura, you're like, oh, there's some distance. But once it was actually here, once it was visible in the mountains nearby, that's when it became a bit real.
And then I was called into work a Saturday morning to do a special Saturday morning newscast because we don't usually do those live. So I'm at the station completely alone. There's nobody else in the building. It's 4 a.m. I'm working on stacking the show and trying to just look at the coverage they did the night before and see what I can update for 9 a.m. And then I start hearing the scanners just go haywire. There's, we hear police scanners and first responder scanners all the time, but rarely do you hear like a level of distress in their voice, and I could hear that coming through the scanner. So I kind of stopped what I was doing and listened to them, and the fire was rushing towards the Toro Canyon area and the areas around Carpinteria and Montecito, calling out different units to go to different streets and start evacuating these people. And I heard that and was like, okay, we're not on air right now, and there's people that need to be evacuated. And then we got an emergency alert sent out, which got sent out to basically everyone in the county, telling people that they needed to evacuate because of this large fire. And then the newsroom started getting flooded with calls from people, and they're wondering, should I evacuate? And I'm listening to the scanner and listening to the areas that they're saying need to be evacuated. So I'm literally relaying to them what I'm hearing on the scanners, because at that point, you sort of stop being a news producer and you're really just you're a public servant at that point, a source of public information. So I just remember being on the phone with this one lady, telling her that she wasn't in an evacuation zone that I'd heard of yet, but she lived very close, and I was like, if you see sheriffs coming down your street, they're going to be telling you to pack up and go. And then after that, we kind of had to rush to get on air. I had to send an editor to go pick up our director so that we could fire everything up and get on air. I called our news director to get him into the building. I called one of our anchors who lives in Santa Barbara to come in. And I was supposed to go on air at 9 a.m. and I think we ended up going on air around 5:30 or 6 with one reporter, one director, one anchor, and then it was just, that launched another set of marathon coverage. So that morning, just being alone in the station and just kind of everything going haywire around me. There might have even been a power outage. I don't know, just everything started going wrong all at once, and that launched, that was what began the next big set of fire coverage, because that was what burned the hills above Carpinteria and Montecito and eventually led to the mudslides.
We all lifted each other up. Now, we had people in this newsroom who were evacuated themselves, who had their families evacuated, but still came in here every single day, worked 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 hours at a time, whatever it took.
Me living in Carpinteria, we were under pretty much voluntary evacuation the entire time I was working. So I had pretty much all of my stuff packed up in my car for 2 weeks, just waiting for that alert that was like, you need to get out, because from the front door, we live up to some hills, and from the front door I could see flames. So having to come to work and, you know, focus on the job and getting the information out there and the hours that we were putting in, meanwhile you're worried, you know, are you gonna have something to go back to? And just kind of having all your stuff packed up in your car and still having to come to work and focus was stressful, and it definitely made it difficult to do the job, and something I had never dealt before.
Yeah, it was definitely a hectic time here because all of us were pretty much camped here and living here almost, because, you know, it was a big story. It was something that was going on for like 2 to 3 weeks. And I think as journalists, we felt, you know, we need to keep helping our community. We need to keep people informed about what's going on.
We just had like a feeling like this is gonna be big. And so I ended up working like 14, 15 hours the first night. And then over the coming days, I was actually sleeping on a cot in the back because they wanted me to be here from overnight. So I would show up later than my normal shift and then stay overnight and work like 12 to 13 hours. And so when it was quiet, I'd go and take a break and sleep on a cot in the back by the edit bay. That was exhausting for a while. I did that for about 3 days.
21, 22-hour days. You know, where all of a sudden you look at the clock and go, whoa, 10 hours just went by. You know, and you just don't, and you've been talking the whole time. I mean, it wasn't 10 hours of nothing, it was 10 hours of really intense stuff. So you're sitting there getting information out, a total flow of information, and it was like that for days. And it was a complete team effort. I think the best part of this whole thing was just how the team came together and was able to just put on an amazing product.
There was a day where we were on the air about 36 hours straight. And it's when evacuations were ordered in the Montecito area. And we had a huge wind event that was on a Saturday. And it was part of nonstop coverage. And I came in and I took us through, my co-anchor at the time, Stacy Sakai, and I took us through till the end of the show of this 36-hour marathon.
Seeing our crews out there, I know there were a couple of times where, you know, John was out there and you could see the flames behind him. Joey at one point during the day was up, I think it was Gibraltar Road, and you could just see this whirlwind, this huge mass of almost a fire tornado coming around his head. And we were like, get him out of there. I mean, there was a real fear in the newsroom. Kelsey was in the newsroom with us, and we saw that and thought, oh my God, he is not gonna have much time to get away from that. Those were, you know, just seeing our crews out in the field, seeing how fast this was moving, how quickly it was moving, and how monstrous it had become is just seared in our memories.
There was like 65 days where I worked nonstop, and it is a blur to me. And I remember just checking in with my family, telling them I was okay, and then, you know, just staying on the story. You did not want to leave. I mean, as a reporter, your job is to be there, and you felt like you might miss out on something.
Working wall-to-wall coverage, you get this adrenaline boost because you're covering a breaking situation. So even if you're tired, even if you haven't slept in a couple days, you're just going and you're just kind of running on this extra fuel inside of you that you don't know you have until you're in a situation like that. For me, it's one of those situations that even when you get off work, you don't want to leave because you're still wanting to cover it and you feel like it's unfinished if there's still breaking situations.
You had Christmas month, which basically nobody thought about at that point anymore because everything just became about the fire.
The way that our folks had to go without sleep, work for 12-hour or more shifts, be able to respond quickly to things, it was remarkable. Amazing. The fact that this team did what it did, and there was no complaining or bitching or moaning or anything like that. It was what do we do next? What do we need to be doing? You need to go home and sleep. No, I can do something else. No, you need to go home and sleep. That came up a couple of times with people. But that's, wonderful that they're that way, but part of the job is making sure people are getting the rest that they need. And so it was a remarkable group of people working, dedicated to doing everything that needed to be done.
You can only see so much through a TV, and that's why we try to paint a good picture when you're reporting to show people what it's actually like. But during the Thomas Fire, we really tried to give people an idea of how bad it really was.
Turn around! The flash flood's right there! The flash flood's right there! Get out of here! Go! Oh my God, Mom!
It's not lost on me that Ryder and I could have died that night of the mudslide. We were on the freeway and there was a truck passing by when that deluge came. We were in a Subaru. It handled so well, and I was screaming, Ryder, get off the freeway, get off the freeway. And we were trying to get to the fire that started because of the gas line breaking. And we went to San Ysidro Ranch because that was the closest we could get to the fire. It was sort of behind the fire. Had we taken Olive Mill, we'd be gone.
We would have been in the river of mud coming down Montecito that went over the Olive Mill overpass. We would have went under the overpass. We would have been in the waterfall of mud. And so I know Tracy and I talked about it for a long time. I don't think we would have, it would have been bad. And we didn't know that. I don't think anyone knew that. I don't think anyone knew how bad it was. And so we think about it, what happens if that fire wasn't called? Like, we would have driven straight into it.
At threat of being shut down if it hasn't been already. I know Mabrice is kind of keeping an eye on that right now.
I remember John Palmentary was out in the field and he was describing the scene, what he was witnessing, and also he was talking to Dave Zanaboni at the time. And I remember Joyce was panning out and seeing in the distance there was somebody in a stretcher being carried over, and I could tell it was a body. And that still hits me every time I think about it. And then the look on Dave Zanaboni's face said it all. He was just so stricken. Even he couldn't come to words as to what he just saw. And that is pretty much how I felt as well. Just didn't know how to react.
I thought this could be trouble. I thought this is the type of thing that could trigger a mud and debris flow, but when I thought what the end result would be, I thought maybe mud flowing down the street up to people's knees. I didn't envision and imagine boulders tearing down hillsides and ripping homes off their foundation. I didn't imagine the 101 becoming filled with mud. I just had no idea it would be to that extent. I know the night before I had done a graphic that said extreme risk, and again, extreme risk. I thought that there would be mud and debris flows. I thought there could be some damage. I had no idea that these would be fatal and prove fatal.
The mudslide was one of the worst natural disasters we've ever covered, and it was beyond description at some point for me, for the public information officers, for the people that live there, to have some understanding of seeing not just water coming out of creeks, but debris, broken homes, the deceased, vehicles tumbling over, ending up in the street in an unrecognizable form, not just where they told us it might happen, but very far down the creeks it was coming out. And then to take out the freeway is shocking.
In Montecito, and it is obliterated right now, unrecognizable.
It's one thing to see it on TV and you can't believe it. And then when you get out there and you see it, you still can't imagine how it happened. You just can't put it to words of how bad it was.
It's covered in boulders and debris. You see this brand new Volkswagen. It has been ripped either out of the driveway or out of the garage from all the mud that came flowing through this house. This house and many others on this street, nearly every one of them, has mud in it several feet high.
Total destruction. I mean, seeing trucks and SUVs and cars mangled like tinfoil on a beach. And you know they travel all the way from downstream. Homes, I mean, gone. I mean, not just the home, but the foundation was gone. Creeks that were, 15, 20 feet wide are now 10 times that, and 20 feet deep. I mean, boulders the size of garages. And when I was standing there in the middle of all of it, in the days afterward, it was hard to comprehend that this really happened. Am I standing here looking at what I'm looking at?
So this was a storm that we knew had the massive potential to do some extreme harm because we had the Thomas Fire starting in December, didn't get into Santa Barbara County until a couple weeks after that. But this was going to be one of the first major storms coming through. And all of the radar maps had predicted this storm as being a huge, massive storm. And that's happened before, and then the storm fizzles out. But the entire time leading up to it, we knew this was going to be a big storm. But I don't think anybody would have predicted such a catastrophe like the Montecito mudslide.
We were planning special coverage because we knew the rain was coming, just no one could, or we just had no idea how bad it was going to be. And then seeing that gas line break and seeing the flames pop up as it was still raining and still dark, and seeing flames pop up from the hills of Montecito, just, I don't know, just gave me this overwhelming sense of fear. Because, at that point, you've got flames shooting up from the hills after a driving rainstorm. It's just like, what else can happen to this community? What more do we have to go through? That image will be burned in my memory forever.
The second day after the mudslides, when we were actually able to get a police escort through to get to work, we had to cut through a neighborhood, and seeing, nothing but like the tip of a roof or a chimney sticking out of mud, knowing that there's an entire house under these piles of mud that's now piled, 20, 25 feet high, was one of the just craziest things I've ever seen. We went through one of the neighborhoods that was hit kind of the hardest, and it was the first time I'd realized how much devastation a mudslide can cause. I wasn't naive to it, but I'd never seen it firsthand. And like I said, to see entire houses, entire neighborhoods under mud, you just can't really comprehend the loss at the time. And a lot of that wasn't shown to the public because we couldn't get access to it. We literally just physically couldn't get cameras there to show people. So I think a lot of people don't really understand how bad it was.
I mean, like everyone, you're just in shock. How can, being in the news business so long, you see disasters where they happen all over the globe, but there's something different that is hard to describe when it's actually happening in a place you live, in a place you know, in a place you've been through so many times. It impacts you on a different emotional level.
My first thought, I think I was absolutely stunned. Total disbelief. Don't recognize what you're seeing. And I'd been up late, we had crews here because we knew the rains were coming. We didn't know how extensive. Got a couple of hours of sleep and awakened and turned on the TV right away, and I saw John Palminteri at Olive Mill Road and didn't recognize that area. And then I remember District Attorney Joyce Dudley had sent out pictures. She was driving up from Carpinteria and showing the freeway. I'm like, what are we looking at? I mean, you couldn't even fathom this type of disaster. It was just so incredibly massive and unimaginable. And then people started sending me, it was texting. My phone was going off the hook with images and texts, and somebody had sent me a picture of one of the victims. And you realize the toll that this took within a short amount of time. Lives lost, homes lost, what happened to our community. And you didn't know what was next.
When I was working on the desk, I had one person call me who was a service member who was in Hawaii. And he called and he's like, my dad and my brother were swept away. I'm just trying to figure out if we know if they're okay. Like, my brother I know is okay, he called me, but they haven't been able to find my dad. He told me where they were. It was, I think, Hot Springs Road, I think. I just told him, like, I'm gonna be straight with you, that area was hit really bad. So I don't have any update for you. They haven't released the deceased at the time, but it's probably pretty bad. And he gave me his name, his father's name, and his phone number. His name was John McManigal. I was looking throughout the day for that name, hoping not to see it, but that was one of the people. A couple hours later, we found out who was confirmed deceased.
In addition to being an anchor, I put out a lot of information on the web, and which was so important. I think the web element of it is really big because people didn't always have access to a TV. A lot of people cut the cord, so they rely on their apps, they rely on the social media, and whenever we got new names confirmed and I was pushing that out to the web, there was always a huge weight on the keyboard. I knew that somebody was going to see that and read a name and they were going to have the worst day of their life.
Being up in the audio booth when Tracy found a body. It wasn't live on air, but we could see it in the monitors. Obviously we didn't take the footage, but we still watched as police and fire came and removed the body and everything. That was sad, and that was hard to watch.
So we get to Olive Mill, and they hadn't covered anyone yet.
Saw the flames on the other side of
I
the
think
highway.
Tracy saw the little girl that died.
On Park Lane, where we think
She saw someone because I remember she screamed, and she was like, "Ryder, don't look." And I remember, and I asked her later, I was like, "Why didn't you want me to look?" And she was like, "I think I saw the little girl that died." And I know for me as myself, I know I saw blood in the mud.
The mudslide not only caught so many people off guard, even though there was a warning that it was potential. We didn't understand what a debris flow was. We hadn't seen one in years here. We've seen creeks overflowing. But to have a debris flow that took down so many structures and took lives, as the debris flow unfolded, we ended up hearing the names of people that were lost, missing, weren't answering their phones. And someone was close to me. Josie Gower was one of the first names mentioned. And I had just seen her the day before when we were doing a live shot near one of the creeks where she lived. And to hear that she had died the next morning, a great distance away from where I had last seen her and where she lived, was absolutely shocking, beyond belief, to picture how it all happened. So, I was broken for a while on the air. I had to gather that up and pocket that and try and understand what else we were about to see or hear stories about. And the names that came out, every few names you recognized somebody, or then you get a phone call from somebody who wanted you to check on somebody's address or find out where their homes was. And in some cases, the homes were either missing or shattered. And there was a really bad report I'd give back just personally on the phone to people.
A lot of the job is answering phone calls and responding to people like the guy who called about his dad. And people who are concerned about their houses, and just there wasn't a period where the phone wasn't ringing, where there weren't emails coming in. There wasn't obviously Beth and CJ and Joey and all of them who were on air constantly, they were going nonstop, and the rest of the newsroom was going nonstop too. Luckily, by the time it got really bad, there were basically 3 of us working the assignment desk in some capacity, and 3 times as many people, and we were still struggling to answer the phones and respond to emails and update our web as quickly as we should.
Our crew that was in Lower Montecito literally went toward the fire, and by doing that, they took themselves out of danger. They literally drove away from the mudslide because they went to investigate what happened with the fire. We didn't know it at the time, but that's what happened. Once we did know that that's what happened, it was makes you think, and it makes you very reflective about life and how precious it is and how fleeting it can be. But in the moment, it was about covering the story, doing what's happening, providing information in the best context you can with what you have to provide. It was in the 6 a.m. hour before the sun came up, and we knew and were already beginning to report that this thing was really bad. Not just a heavy rain, but there were missing homes. We knew that in a live report from one of our reporters, John Palmentary, who was with the public information officer for the county fire department, and he was pointing down into this dark area where there was clearly nothing and saying there used to be a home here. So we were starting to literally in real time learn that this thing was really bad. Our other crew, the one that moved out of danger, ended up at a location, and this is after the sun went up, where they literally had to not show a victim who was on the street, and having to literally deal with that, see this up close, this horrific result of what had happened, mud and devastation all around them, but yet they still had to go on television and do their thing, and they did.
We went from being actively reporting to now being in the backseat and watching. Right? We were no different from the residents now. We had lived through it. We had seen the destruction, and we're now experiencing it just like everyone else. And I remember we had to walk pretty far to get out of the mud so that someone could pick us up. And it kind of felt like one of those movie moments when like the helicopter comes down and they take you out of the craziness. It was like someone was taking us out of the craziness, and it almost made me feel bad because, we could leave. We could wash our hands of it for a little bit, but a lot of those people can't.
That you can be gone tomorrow, and if you don't stop and smell the roses, and I know that's a cliche, but I feel that every day. I'm so grateful to be here. And I really feel like Ryder and I will be like relatives forever because we overcame that whole disaster.
These types of events, the Thomas Fire, the mudslides, also brought this community together. In a way that, I walk around now and people still walk up to me. And I hear when they walk up to Beth and they're like, God, thank you guys so much for your coverage. And you start to realize how important what we do really is to the community. To be there when you have to be. We were on all those hours, and a lot of that coverage, even though we got a lot of information out, there was a comfort factor. Even though there wasn't a whole lot going on sometimes, people could turn on the TV and see us. And they go, okay, they're on. And that's important. We were there, in some respect, we were there just for comfort, that we were there, and if something happened, we'd be on it like right then and there.
The team is a really huge thing that will always stick with me, because we all came together and all sort of had I almost think of it in the sports world, the playoffs or a bowl game. And you all know what you have to do, and it's extra time and it's extra hours, but you got to be there, and it's the most important thing in the world. And everyone having that feeling, there's a synergy in that. And it makes everyone work harder and really dig deep in themselves. And I thought we all brought out the best in ourselves during that time. Everybody had an incredible attitude, and everyone really cared. And I think for a small market station, we absolutely punched above our weight. And I will always be grateful to the work that I was able to be a part of and the team I was able to be a part of. I think that we all grew from this, and it's helped me become a better journalist, it's helped me become a better anchor. And seeing everybody rise was really inspiring.
I thought it was fortuitous that our news director, Jim Lemon, assigned us the overnight shift. We did that a lot during the Thomas Fire, just in case something blew up. And it always, I thought, was a good idea. And I used to think, oh, if we're working the overnight shift, nothing will happen. But boy, were we wrong. We were the only people there during it. We're lucky to be here. But I mean, as a reporter, that's what you live for. Isn't it sad that, you just want to be the conduit between information and the people that need that information. And I feel fortunate that we were the first people on the Thomas Fire and then the first people on the mudslide. It was an eerie coincidence that we were the reporters assigned both of those shifts. That is bizarre.
And I remember driving past Ventura for the first time, and I was on the phone with a best friend back home in Florida, and I remember seeing the burnt out homes in Ventura, and I just completely broke down. It's difficult. I think it's difficult for anyone, and even though we have to, or we try to put on a different type of face when we're on television, because we're there to storytell, like I said, we're human, so it's difficult. And my heart's heavy right now even thinking about it.
It was really strange because for me it was just such a blending of horror and unimaginable devastation, but then these incredible signs of hope and these really beautiful moments where you would just see neighbors all gathered and talking and hugging each other and kind of renewing and re-strengthening each other. And one fellow who I've become very good friends with and his family, we were in his home. This is Marco Farrell, and he was the one who got the first head of the slide as it was coming down Olive Mill Road, and alerted his parents. And we were over at his house and we were walking through feet of mud throughout the entire home. And there was a woman in there. And she said, they both looked at me and they said, we've lived across the street from each other for decades. Barely talked. And she goes, I'm over at his house now every day. And I'm bringing him food, and he goes, and I'm over at her house checking the refrigerator. And these people finally became neighbors. And it took something this devastating for them to realize that the person next door to them was worth knowing and worth loving and worth risking their own life for. So that really stuck with me.
Or I hope people feel that we help get them through a terrible time.
In times of disaster and emergency, we are the beacon. We are the one resource that gets life-saving information out to the public. And the effort, the professionalism, the ability to power through your own emotions that the staff was able to do, whether you consciously knew it or not, the community needed you all more ever before. The right team to be what the community needed when they needed us the most.